All right, everybody, welcome to episode 3, a special episode of the Holy Face Generations podcast. My name is Tom Zuzolo. We got a special guest today, my younger brother, Joe Zuzolo. We got our mother, Mary Jane Zuzolo, Holy Face expert and relative of Sister Mary St. Pierre. And we're going to be talking to her again today with a special edition episode. Joe wanted to join us today. Actually, I asked him. I basically dragged him in here. I forced him to join us because he is very smart as well, and he has a great way of thinking about things and addressing things. And we wanted to do a special episode talking about Holy Face and how the communism relates to essentially blasphemy, how communism leads to blasphemy, how that relates to the Holy Face devotion. Communist lovers are not going to enjoy this one. You might want to skip today's episode. I also am a little unprepared today. I just got done filming the last episode, and so I'm going to be kind of playing a useful idiot character. I'm going to be asking some questions while these two talk about the talking point. So, Mom, you want to get us started? You want to share what we're going to be talking about today? Give us a little outline.
Sure. And I'm going to rely a lot on Joe because, as Tom said, this is the second episode we're doing today. And
We both changed our shirts, though, so that we at least looked a little bit more
yes,
refreshed, I
that's
guess.
right. That's right. But we're in a spiritual battle, and Christ in the Revelations, he says a number of kind of honestly shocking things. And one of the things is that this is the greatest devotion, and yet it makes sense because he says more than once that our time's iniquity has never reached such a degree. We need to make reparation for the greatest crime. So greatest devotion, making reparation for the greatest crimes.
And we just got done talking in the last episode about how blasphemy is the most offensive sin to God.
Yes.
And so that kind of ties in as well.
That's right. It sure does. And Christ describes that blasphemy wounds his heart more than any other crime. And, in the case of blasphemy, we talked about offenses against the first 3 commandments, the rights of God, and that how ideologies can be this way too, because anytime we in effect make ourselves a God, rather than relying on the authority of God, that is a blasphemous act. And so, we're going to be talking about how communism is not just godless, it's anti-God. And Christ describes in the Revelation that the communism is actually his enemy, the enemy also of his church. And so I know Joe, he's a deep diver when it comes to researching things.
Some would call him a nut job.
Oh,
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just giving you a hard time.
And I said, well, maybe don't touch too much on what is in the 8th chapter of the book, because down the road I want to get to that. So he's done his own research, and maybe you can just kind of help us understand how is communism so anti-God, and how does it show in today's culture? Because we know in the past some things, but yeah, can you
Yeah,
just
get
help
us
us
kick
out?
started, Joe. We got. He already read me some of his outlines. He's got some heat.
Well, I mom's the authority here. She's the one who's written a book about this. So really, my hope is to kind of present some notes, present some questions, and she can kind of fill in the blanks and give us a more complete picture as to why communism, why modernism, why Marxist ideology is so dangerous and offensive to the faith, to the devotion, and to our country, what we deal with today. So starting off, Mom mentions in her book, that Sister Marie de Saint Pierre, she hated the repercussions of the French Revolution, and they were pernicious influences permeating the entire world. And Marxism is really at the center of that. And to kind of kick things off with Marx and his ideology, I would like to quote a pretty well-known verse from one of his poems, which many believe to be him attributing this to communism. He says, "See the sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me, And many people know that communism, accounts for more than 100 million deaths worldwide at its peak. But some people believe that it kind of fell off with the fall of the Berlin Wall. That was sort of the end of it. But really, it's still around, and it's still doing a lot of damage in the form of modernism, something we all contend with today.
Which is
And
essentially blasphemy.
yes,
And I would say, socialism, as Lenin himself said, the goal of socialism is communism. And, he himself called himself a democratic socialist. So I think we need to be very careful of, you know, there's more extreme forms of socialism, tyrannical socialism, but I think any form is dangerous, and the popes have warned about this consistently.
Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, he describes the abuses of the ruling class, and that the proletariat, the working class, is suffering on their behalf because of them, and they're being abused. And he uses this as a justification to deny all eternal truths, as he says, all religion, all morality, all law. This is word for word from his manifesto. And this justification for the denial of the divine, of its laws, and the basis of which being, well, it's because I'm suffering, I'm being abused, I have to work for a living. That's essentially what he's saying. This is a deliberate act of blasphemy. In my research, and this is what I want to talk to Mom about, because it's the opposite of what Job did. Job had every reason to blaspheme. The devil, that he killed all of his flocks, he killed his children, he afflicted him with terrible diseases. But he never blasphemed. And yet today, with the repercussions of what Marx presented in his manifesto, people blaspheme at the slightest inconvenience. They stub their toe and they blaspheme. And this really, I feel like, it began with what Marx wrote in the manifesto.
Well, one thing that also stands out to me is that the frontal attack on religion is in itself a form of blasphemy. It's one thing if you are kind of a well-meaning politician who's just trying to reform some changes, and kind of by your own mistakes you hurt the religious community. That's one thing, but it seems that this is a frontal attack on religion as a whole. And what do you think about that, Mom?
Yes, and in the Revelations, Christ explains that modern blasphemies are renewed injuries to his face. And one of the things that his face is supposed to represent is the doctrine of the church. And, he is the head of the mystical body. So if his face is being disfigured anew, so is the mystical body or the church. And so we are doing it to ourselves. We're the ones inflicting the renewed wounds to Christ, but that is in turn making our own church at times somewhat unrecognizable. And this is not just our opinion. This was warned about, this sort of infiltration and disfigurement of the church was warned about back with Pope Leo the 13th, for example. We talked a lot about him. He's the one that approved the devotion for the whole world, and he had the vision of Satan challenging Christ that he could destroy his church if given enough time and power over those under him. And so this was, Leo the 13th, he not only immediately approved the devotion, but he also composed the St. Michael prayer to be said after every low mass. He certainly had an idea of the infiltration that was possible. And then we have, speaking of the modernists, Pius X warned of the infiltration of modernism from within, meaning within the church even. And then, let's see.
So it's safe.
I'm sorry. Paul the Sixth. He was the one that said the smoke of Satan has entered the church, and it's commonly understood that he was probably referring to some anti-communist documents not being included in Vatican II. And so I just wanted to point out it's not our opinion, and it's been said by popes. And so yeah, so you I don't know
Sorry
if you
for
want
being a little jumpy. This is my second Red Bull today. I'm a little wired.
We're
but
gonna get them off those, but it's okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I had a question. There was a
Okay.
reason I jumped in there. Firstly, I think it's important to reiterate that Pope Leo XIII was a big fan of Sister Mary of St. Pierre. And immediately, I know you said this, but I just think it's worth restating that immediately released the devotion and thought it was almost like, is it safe to say almost like an emergency? And then the second question is, what I'm gathering is it's safe to say that the church has not been completely unaffected by the modern communism. It has made some of its way in,
Yes.
but we have to use the devotion in part to battle against that.
That's exactly right. And I know you had mentioned some sort of ways in which communism surfaces in our culture that we may not be aware that the root of these ways of thinking or activities is communism. So can you talk about that and anything else we may have made you rush past?
Yeah, fill us in, Joe.
Well, today it's very common to see people who they seem to embrace more of a socialist mindset in the context of increasing federal involvement in pretty much everything. And there's a lot of people on welfare. There's a lot of people getting tax money who, they have, some have legitimate qualifications, but in general, I think there's people in society today who have kind of lost touch with reality because they don't really want to work. They don't want to work full time, and that leads them to become delusional. And they kind of hope that they'll get a free ride from the government, And this, I believe, goes back to Marx's idea of the working class victim, the abused working class who has to shed these fetters and break free and revolt. And while I certainly understand that he's preaching to the marginalized of society, it's not a legitimate solution. Even going back to Genesis in chapter 3, God tells Adam, you'll have to work and eat the plants of the field by the sweat of your face. You shall eat bread until you return to the ground, because out of dust you were taken, and to dust you shall return. And there's really no getting away from the work that we have to do. And furthermore, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, St. Paul says that the one who is unwilling to work shall not eat. And so the whole idea of revolution because we're being abused is an affront. It's affront to blaspheme. It's an excuse to blaspheme. It's saying we don't like to suffer, so we're just going to blaspheme instead. We're not going to work. We're going to reject God. We're going to reject his divine law. We're going to reject the natural law. We're not going to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and we certainly aren't going to render unto God what is God's. And so obviously that revolutionary mindset you still see today, and people have no objections with insisting that their subjective truth is valid and that everybody can live how they want. And the logical response to this, to the idea that there is no objective truth, is pretty simple. If you ask me, is that objectively true? You must have the law, and you have to acknowledge the divine, but people don't want to do this. And I think that's why blasphemy is so prevalent, is because it's a way to almost celebrate the fact that they consider themselves free from the divine law.
Yeah, I think this notion that you bring up of not wanting to work and seeing work as a burden, a hindrance, that I think ties in with Venerable Fulton Sheen's warning that if we go down this path and allow this infiltration in various ways, we're going to have a religion without the cross. And he goes on and gives some other examples, but I think that kind of ties in with what Joe's saying. And we're reminded of Paul, and he says, we preach Christ crucified. And earlier, near that statement, he warns of basically the cross without the corpus, and he's like, that is the power. Don't take that off. And we as Catholics believe that there is great meaning in suffering. It is the way to get closer to God, and we are to collaborate with Him as co-redeemers, and that's what this devotion is all about. We are to help each other by collaborating and making reparation for those that maybe just through no fault of their own, they have no idea that this is something they should be doing.
Well, it's ironic too, because one of the things we talked about in our first episode was how people are disregarding Sunday as just another ordinary day of the week. And there is something to be said about taking some time off. And it is easy to get burnt out when you're working. And it's almost like, the Creator had a plan and He gave us Sunday, and we have rejected Sunday, and we don't want to, spend it as a rest day and a day for the Lord anymore. And now we're, talking about other symptoms of that are that you might feel overworked. And I'm one of those people. I consider myself somebody, I call it a European work ethic. And I don't, I enjoy some free time. I enjoy to relax. But there's times and places. It's just like anything. We have to remember that God gave us time to relax, time to work. And touch back on the cross without the body. What does that mean for somebody who might be new to that concept?
I think that means that, that our strength or the power comes from the sacrifice of Christ crucified, and that our way to salvation, we do our part of suffering with the dignity of Christ and joining our suffering with Christ, and that is what it's all about. Some would like to separate suffering from religion, but it doesn't make sense, and how would that make sense in day-to-day life, and how would that feel to feel like suffering is something to be deeply ashamed of? And in the book of Job, we found that is not the case, and that his suffering in the end bore great fruit, and he was able to he was so pleasing to God because he did suffer with grace, that then his friends who had offended God deeply, he asked the friends to present Job's face to him rather than their own. And this is, we'll get into this. I don't want to go down this too far, but that's the whole idea of our offering Christ's face to the Father, his wounded face, because his merits are sort of residing in that face. And this whole thing of you don't want to be ashamed of the cross. And I know a lot of people are, and maybe initially, I don't want to say turned off, but they don't really like this suffering.
It's a little
face.
scary.
It's a little scary, I guess. But that is where the power is, and this is the power of this suffering face is really heretofore unknown in this way, and we'll get into all that. But I want to ask Joe about modernism, because maybe we're in this day and culture, people don't come out and say that certain things are of communist origin, but we certainly have modernism, postmodernism, relativism, and so forth. And you might speak to that some.
I think whatever you want to call it, the liberalism, modernism, wokeism, they're all terms that, while not necessarily interchangeable, they all point in the same direction. It's all a deliberate denial of the established law, the established order, which was given to us by God. And essentially the Ten Commandments and everything that goes along with that. And I think the reason that there is so much of an attack on the church, on both from within and from outside forces. The kind of popular notion of the hippie Jesus, the tolerant Jesus, the acceptance, pacifism. There, there's fear associated with the cross that we have to bear. The church is sick in that regard. The bride is sick, and we can't abandon her. But the modernist movement in the church is, I would say, overwhelming one of tolerance, and there's enemies who have to be fought. There is a cross that is laying, and we have to pick it up, and there is work to be done. And this is what Marx hates. He says, don't do any of that. Just entrust it all to the state and overthrow your oppressors.
Well, you're a very accomplished fisherman as well, and I think there's something to be said about the fact that Jesus was a fisherman and chose fishermen. He didn't choose to work with people who were maybe a little bit more lazy. He chose very hardworking, very risk-taking people, and I like what you're saying. It's easy to slip into this idea that God created us just to sit around and be happy. But I think he created the slugs for that. I think we're supposed to be, suffering alongside him, taking up his cross. And realistically, the most I think you can feel is when you are suffering for something good. And I don't think people would even want to live a life where it's just constant ease and relaxation. I sometimes feel like I almost wish I had more work to do, but I might just be a little hyperactive. But not to derail the subject, Mom, I know you have more to share on this. Let's hear what you think.
Well, I know Joe had mentioned that he found some good quotes from some saints about some of this, and is that jumping ahead too much?
No, I think we can get into some of them. I think that they relate more towards modernism affecting the church.
Okay.
I think there is pressure for the church to quote unquote get with the times, which I think is exactly the opposite of what it should do. I think it needs to remain firm and uphold its divine law. And I like what Tom's saying about work, but this isn't just about work. This is about tolerance and the law, and the work relates to the law. When you preach tolerance, like it or not, you deny the law. If you deny that there's a right and wrong way to do things, and you're like, oh, well, let them do their thing, then all of a sudden you lose the fight, you lose the reason to fight. And I think that's why people become lukewarm, is they are too tolerant, and they forget that, the battle is spiritual and it's very real. But St. John Chrysostom states, and this is kind of related to the hippie Jesus mindset and the preaching of tolerance today, pacifism today, that we see all too often. And it kind of, even with the liturgy, it seems people are getting, kind of lazy about that too. He says, you dare to seize the scriptures while you stand outside the church. You are no different from the devil who quoted the scriptures to tempt the Lord. You tear the words of God from the body of Christ and twist them to your own ruin. You make the gospel a sword against the gospel and set Christ's house in flames with your private opinions. Such men are worse than unbelievers, for they speak in Christ's name while they war against his bride. Flee from your own inventions, abandon your lawless interpretations, and bow before the judgment of the church. And that is pretty strong. That's a pretty strong statement. But this was a guy who was dealing with heresies far before Protestantism. But really, he's saying, look, you don't get to decide, if the law is just or unjust, like Marx is saying. You don't get to decide if you want to abandon it. You must submit to the authority of the church, to Rome, pick up your cross, do your work, and, through that you will obtain salvation.
Mom, this sounds a little bit like blasphemy.
It does, and it
sounds
sounds
it.
like he could have been talking a lot more in our times than he was.
When I hear Joe say these quotes, and Joe did such a good job with these.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds almost like word for word blasphemy, because blasphemy, as we've discussed, is not simply saying OMG. It's also putting your needs above God and essentially just disrespect.
That's right. It's a kind of like I think we said before, either doubting or rejecting God's authority to the point of inventing your own truth and morality. And, I think that was reflected in that quote. And, that we are not to make ourselves a God. It's not our right to decide our own morality, or to somehow put God in a box. That is something that Job's friends in the book of Job struggled with. And so, yeah, all these things, both they wanted to basically decide that their definition of God's justice was going to be what was, and to the point of ignoring Job's innocence. And so, yeah, we don't get to choose what is truth, and we don't get to choose what is morality. Those we have to rely on from God.
Well, and it also seems like, I'll just say it like this. If you were to call me a gay hippie, I would be kind of offended. And if we're kind of inferring that Jesus was some kind of gay hippie, that's kind of offensive. And I don't think I think that's just as much blasphemy as just taking his name in vain. We have to respect the ways that he was, and he wasn't just some happy-go-lucky Muppet. He was God.
Yeah, and it's all about the cross and the his sacrifice.
He was a
for us.
sacrificer.
Yeah, so he wasn't just happy-go-lucky in that at all. But that was our salvation. So, yeah.
People take the fact that Jesus dined with sinners and he associated with ladies of the night. That's speculated. You can't say that for sure, but the woman at the well and Mary Magdalene are both kind of speculated to be along those lines. Perhaps scandalous woman would be a better definition, but they take the fact that he associated with sinners and they twist it. And Christ, said himself he does not come to condemn, and that was something that we can't forget either. But let alone notwithstanding the fact that he also died for his Father's commandments. He died because we violated those commandments. He gave his life for the law of his Father. And ultimately, that is what we are called to do as well. And going back to what Tom said a little earlier about how blasphemy isn't always just OMG, it takes many forms, but I believe at its core, it's the denial of God, his law, his divinity. And I wrote here about the martyrdom of Saint Polycarp. To deny God and live by any other authority, let alone your own, is deliberate blasphemy. The martyrdom of Saint Polycarp stands as a testament to the truth in stark contrast to the modern man, unwilling to believe in any truth except his own, yet eager to swear by God on every occasion and for the slightest inconvenience. And so this is pretty short, but when Saint Polycarp was being martyred, the Roman consul said, "Swear by Caesar and I will set you free." And St. Polycarp answered, 86 years I have served him, and he has never wronged me. How can I blaspheme my king who saved me? And so the consul condemned him to be burned alive. When they tied him to the stake and he began to pray aloud, Lord God Almighty, Father of your beloved Son, Jesus Christ, I bless you that you have counted me worthy to share in the cup of Christ. And this, I believe, is to stand firm for the law and to praise God despite the devil and all of his attempts to lead us into despair. And then the flames rose around him like a golden arch, not touching his body. Seeing that the flames would not consume him, a soldier pierced him with a spear, but so much blood poured from the wound that it quenched the fire. And this was how St. Polycarp died. But he would not even swear by Caesar. He would not do anything to jeopardize his total allegiance to God and his law. And it very similar to Job, who the devil, was granted almost every method of leading him into despair short of taking his life. But, he refused. And yet, somebody stubs their toe, OMG. That's what we've come to, unfortunately, because Marx said, hey, you guys are suffering. The ruling class is abusing you. Great. Deny God, deny the law, deny your work. Let's revolt.
Read that again. This first part, the blasphemy quote. To deny God.
Oh, yes. Okay. To deny God and live by any other authority, let alone your own, is deliberate blasphemy.
Yes. Wow. That's just what we were saying.
Yes, that's very good. And I think, to maybe, again, in this on a positive note, I mentioned that a lot of the quotes from Christ in the Revelations are a little bit shocking. And another one is that he says, in the face of just chastisement, which again, that's just us, the consequences of our collective choices. So in that face of just chastisement, this, he says, is the sole means of appeasing the Father. He means offering his face, Christ's face, to the Father in reparation for modern blasphemy. So none of us we don't have the merits to pull this off. We're relying on the merits residing in Christ's suffering face. And so that is very hopeful. And, Christ also says, woe to those that do not make reparation. And he, in this instance, was actually referring to cities. And, we are, in a sense, responsible for our regions, our areas. And if each of us in our towns, in our cities, can make reparation, we may very well be largely mitigating any just chastisement. And this is what's said, that especially it is true of the elements, but also of the quote malice of revolutionary men, is what Christ refers to, the form of chastisement that will be the most inevitable. And again, that's because this is what we're choosing, our collective choices. And so, but it's very hopeful. If each of us could make reparation, then that is, even though it's a selfless act, it will help us and benefit us, because it will help our communities, our society as a whole. And again, even before this devotion was approved by Leo the 13th, Pius IX said of the devotion that it was destined to save society. So this is a huge thing that we can do to turn things around. And I guess I just kind of want to maybe end on that note. And
so we will pull through.
We will pull through.
Hopefully.
Yes.
But we got to do the work. And
Yes.
the opposite is also true. The more that we blaspheme, the more God will leave us to our own devices as just
Exactly.
chastisement. And that seems to be a theme we go back to a lot, where I think we might be seeing some of that. And it's interesting because it's kind of proving you right a little bit. Mom has been on this topic for a while now. And, she's the relative of Sister Mary. And so...
But so are you two.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, but I get that kind of goes without saying, Mom. But all I'm saying is you've been, I think, initially seen as being a little extreme, but the more we go down this road, the more people think back to old Mary Jane, and they think, remember that crazy woman who was talking about blasphemy? Maybe we should rethink some of this, right, Joe?
Yeah, what started with like Henry VIII, just wanting to divorce his wife, in today's measurements and by today's standards, a seemingly reasonable reason to diverge from the church and its authority. But today, look at where that's got us. Today, unspeakable abominations. 1 billion abortions since 1980. 1 billion. Not a lot of people think about that, but I do. And that's what happens when we reject the law. The law is, we can't presume to believe we know better. Whether it's Job or anyone else, we have to have faith in God's law and in his providence. We cannot doubt. And that's all we have to say. And so no blaspheming.
That's
And
right.
That's the keystone. That's the first step, right, Mom?
Yes, and Tom corrected me. It's admirable is the name of God, and I last time I slipped and said the name of the Lord. It means the same thing, but that's something we can say to end this on, a short prayer of reparation. Admirable is the name of God.
Before we go, Joe, what is your thoughts on the devotion? How are you implementing this into your life? What are some, because you're a young guy, I'm a young guy, and I think that it's important. We just talked in the last episode about saying something when blasphemy is going on, and walking the walk. What is something, maybe practical that you think people can do to engage in this devotion besides saying the prayers? How do you like to make reparations?
Well, I'm certainly not as good about it as I'd like to be, and in the workplace, wherever, if people blaspheme the name of God, I saw Tim Tebow. He just will, if somebody says Jesus blaspheming, he'll just say Jesus loves you. And I think that's I don't know what Mom thinks about that.
No, I think
Maybe
that's
it would be better to say what the devotion says, which is admirable is the name of God. But really, I think the blasphemy is going to happen. And so I've been trying to say the Holy Face Chaplet because that is supposed to be, the main means by which we atone for this, we kind of appease. And once again, not on our own merits, but presenting the face of the Son, crucified, bloody, to appease the Father. And then, if people keep saying it around you, in my workplace, I kind of popularized the saying cheese and rice because, people were saying the JC too much. And so we kind of got them to start saying cheese and rice. And,
Mom would have a problem with that too, though, right, Mom?
I guess it is
Suboptimal.
But at
Suboptimal
least
indeed.
it's not like, doesn't exactly start with the same initials, and it's a great, good place to start.
Yeah, and so maybe that's the takeaway, is that I'm still in the starting phase, and we're trying to get a good start, but I don't have too much advice for anybody. I'm really not in a position to offer advice.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because I really look up to your level of frankness. And, even though you're my younger brother, there's a lot of things that I really admire about Joe. And one of the things is he's not giving himself enough credit. He's not afraid to just openly profess his beliefs and openly tell people, I don't appreciate it when you mock my God around me. And I think I'm a little bit too much of a people pleaser sometimes. Sometimes it's hard for me to just, summit that mountain. Not that it's even that big of a deal. And I think I have to remember that I am a little bit nutty, so it doesn't even matter that much. I don't think people really even care what I say anyway. But the bottom line is Joe's really good about that. And I should have expected he's not going to give himself much credit. But he's an example for all of us, and he's done a really good job on this. I'm really happy with this, and Mom did a great job kind of tying it in with the devotion and how communism all plays a part. It seems like the more I learn, the more I realize how these problems we have, it all goes back to kind of the same thing. Mom's old wise words. I guess they weren't exactly your words. You're kind of just a copycat, right, Mom?
Yeah, I just say what the devotion, what was said in the devotion, and it's not my words. This is all from Christ, or it's something that Sister Marie de Saint Pierre understood, and so yeah.
Well, you do a good job, and
likewise for
we're
both of
all
us.
learning at the
Talk
same
about not
time.
giving themselves enough credit. I think Tom is
That's
actually
right.
the supreme example of that. Don't let him fool you. I think Tom. I look up to Tom also so much in so many ways. We don't have enough time to go over all that, but
You heard that here first. We'll have to push that into the after hours episode.
Well, you teased with the first episode and said the next one would be about what a great person he is.
We'll need a whole channel for that, Mom. No, I'm just kidding. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Before we get into too much more, compliments. Let's end it here. And thank you very much for watching this special episode. We'll have Joe back, and then maybe we can do other guests at some point in this nicer room. You may be wondering, why don't we film up here all the time? It is nicer, but we got our setup downstairs, so
Yeah,
we're
and
making it work.
That's right. Normally there's people coming and going, so, but it worked this time great.
We're doing good. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. We will see
Thank
you in the
you.
next episode.